Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Open Network User Group podcast. I'm Mark Tierney, ONUG CTO, and today is the second in the series for the Network Cloud Working Group, and we are going to be talking about transformation and network cloud. Hey, but first, ONUG Spring 2022 will be a hybrid event at the Meadowlands Expo Center, New Jersey. Join the ONUG community of Global 2000 companies, enterprise architects, cloud providers, and thought leaders as we explore the building blocks required to create flexible, transformative IT business platforms. Go to onug.net to register for this event today. So listen, let me bring on my partner in crime, Steve Woods. Steve is a principal engineer, enterprise architecture, and software-defined networking, cloud, and security at Cisco. We tried to get Galactic and Poobah into his title. Somehow it just hasn't happened yet. I don't know why, Steve.
Hey, man, I got to compete with you CTOs. I don't have the C,
yeah. No, that's fair. That's fair. It's a stretch goal, and that's okay. So the team continues to do this amazing work. You and the team, Steve, recently put out a network playbook, and this is the second in a series of, well, I think 4 we're going to try to do around network cloud playbooks. And there's a lot going on in network transformation. Let's bring on the rest of the teammates that are going to be joining us today. William Collins is principal cloud architect at Alcura. William, how you doing?
Hey, man? Doing good. Happy to be here amongst such brilliant minds.
That's right. William's the nice person on this podcast today. That'll be very clear as we move along. Deferential, smart, snappy, but juxtaposed to him, and I mean juxtaposed, Nuno Ferreira. He's a field CTO, distributed cloud at F5. Nuno.
Hello. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. It's great to be here in the panel with such a great panel today.
I'm expecting a lot out of all of you today. So Steve, sort of kick us off here today. Why don't you give us for those who missed the first podcast, why don't you just give just a little bit of an overview on the Network Cloud Playbook and what that's all about, if you don't mind.
Sure. I think really the best way to think about this is kind of coming off the, what we did in ONUG for SD-WAN and sort of looking at what was next. We realized that the network is actually changing a lot, actually, compared to where we were maybe 5-6 years ago when we were working on, the first SD-WAN architectures and methods, right? So what we found with this new change in the network, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the process, is that, the way SD-WAN, there's 2 things. The network's changing, so SD-WAN has to change. We talk a little bit about that in the paper. And then also the consumption model of the network is changing. So we need to change the architecture as well of how we deploy and the types of services that we deploy. And that's all part of what we're dealing with in the white papers. Like, what's changing in the network? What does that change mean for you? What kinds of things do you need to think about in terms of next generation technology deployment to take advantage of these changes in the network in order to make your network more on demand and basically more automatically deployed, less work for you and more services.
So one of the great things about what we do at ONUG, and particularly in the working groups, of which there are 4 or 5, is we put together collateral that's of assistance to the enterprise consumers, and we do that with our supplier partners, sitting side by side with the consumers, and we get a lot of work done. Nuno, you've seen it. You've seen all the changes that's going on. What from your point of view, what are you seeing as some of the big drivers in network change right now?
Yeah, so there is a lot of change, and I think that one of the big drivers that provokes this change is the increasing consumption of public clouds. And because the increasing consumption of public clouds makes the network more broad, makes the reach of the network go a little bit further than what it used to do. If we talk about SD-WAN, as in the preambles that Steve was mentioning, it was all about connecting remote offices with the main offices where the applications were living, so branch offices, remote locations, and make that kind of one network with a cheaper way of transport, so to speak. That was what the initial SD-WAN purpose was about. But then when companies start using public clouds, and most of them different public clouds, and several different public clouds in different regions, in whatever they are, the network reach is going to be much bigger, much more deeper. And this is what is creating this change, because now you not only have to create the connectivity between those data centers or private environments that you have when I mean private environments, I mean remote offices, branch offices, private data centers, but also you have to go into the public cloud providers and actually configure the network and build the network there inside those public cloud providers. And this creates a very different set of not only frameworks, but methodology and operations as well, because the public cloud provider, they normally operate with a different set of constructs that people are used to operate when they are on their private environment.
And that's the deal, right? I mean, you use the word framework, and I guess I wonder, is that even legit? Like, is everyone approaching this the same? From a public cloud perspective, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of variability. I mean, William, you're kind of fresh out of the consumption side. You just took the evil pill of being a supplier not that long ago. What's your take on this? Is it all a perfect framework and everybody's doing it the same from a cloud perspective?
Let me just put it this way. So in the past 2 weeks, I've talked to an enterprise that was running primary and secondary MPLS with SD-WAN on top of it. And then I talked to another enterprise that's away with all that. Internet for everything. Internet's the way of the future. Public endpoints, just completely different mentality. And two of these were, what I would consider almost risk-averse companies in the grand scheme of things. So I don't think there's any commonality among any big companies I talk to anymore. I think they're all approaching it from a different way based on what their business goals are. And in the past with the large vendors, Cisco's, VMware's and everything, back when I was in the data center, racking and stacking gear, you had this validated design. And you would take it from these vendors, and it was okay, 3-tier architecture, do this, this, and this. And you would, insert some of your own custom things in there, but it was generally what everybody, was doing. And now there's just so many different ways to do things, so many different services, platforms, and everything, that how can any enterprise have the same framework, really?
So let me use that then as a segue. We talked about this in pre-show. I mean, what is network cloud, Steve? I mean, what does that mean? What should it be meaning to people? What is network cloud?
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good question. So what it means to me is the following. When you look at what happened in cloud, right? Basically the idea of an infrastructure as a service data center, what really the big shift was the change of consumption model, the ability to basically conduct and create things in the cloud without having to, essentially buy tons of gear and, be, married to that, because I just spent, a huge amount of CapEx to build servers and all this other stuff. Now I'm kind of stuck. I got to do what I said I was going to do. Whereas if you get this uncommitted infrastructure, you can actually try something. So you want to put an aggregation site in the cloud, by the way, you can do that today. And you can try that. And if it doesn't work out, you can tear it down in a few minutes and try something else or do something else, right? It's that consumption model, that idea that I can do experiments, I can try things, and I'm not committing, huge amount of capital intensive resources to that problem until I'm essentially ready to, expand it. And then I can scale it up, scale it down at will, right? I can make it bigger or smaller. I can drop network services in places where I need them for, where I anticipate more load. It's bringing that kind of consumption paradigm to the network, which it never had before, right? The network has always been, I'm building a big branch network, I'm building a WAN, whether it's a service provider or I'm building my own, I'm buying a lot of gear, and I'm basically building it piece by piece by piece, full stack. Now we're saying, hey, infrastructure as a service brought to the network. What does that look like? Who's managing the infrastructure? What part of the stack do I care about as a customer to deliver my business model? And how can I do that in a really fast and efficient and agile way? That's what it means, I think, to me.
So Nuno, one of the things I worry about, having a long career on the infrastructure side and spent quite a bit in wide area network engineering in my own right. Sometimes options breeds complexity. Are we there now? Like it does feel like we have an enormous number of options, and is this how is this confusing to the customer, or am I wrong? I mean, it's
No,
perfectly
no,
fine to say I'm wrong, but
you're right. That there are options, and there are always going to be options. And William just mentioned a few, right? Where one enterprise was building based on MPLS networks, and the other one was building out of the internet. I do agree with William that everything will converge to use the internet, because if you see the quality of the internet and the pipes that you can get out of the internet today, they are so powerful, so strong, and so reliable that it kind of defeats the purpose of building private links with the SLAs. But there are still companies that need them, right? And you need the SLAs, and that's very important. But what I think it's important more is that the SD-WAN, the initial idea of SD-WAN was to commoditize all that the transport should not matter, right? The transport should be anything, and then you create kind of an overlay on top of any transport, and you build your infrastructure. That did not change. What it did change now is where that connectivity needs to reach out to. And going back to the public clouds, and there are different, and obviously each public cloud have their own different APIs, their own different set of services, their own different set of devices that you need to build and spin up and provision to actually build your network. But the most important thing is that underneath, if you're talking about the transport itself, you are always going to have options. Now, what you do with those options is what's important. And I think we are going to talk a little bit further down this conversation, which is the increasing of automation in the network part, right? Increasingly, people are trying to automate, and automating things, normally it's tied to having very well-defined sets of information. Let me try to explain this in a different way. When you try to automate things, you want to have the least amount of variables possible, right? Because if you have less variables, you can just click deploy, and just deploy a bunch of things without changing any variable, right? And if you have a lot of variables, every time that you deploy something, you have to go and change those variables. And this is very important. Why? Because one of the things, in going back to network, one of the things that has been very important is automate the network, automate network builds. And when you automate network builds, you want to try to get, again, the least amount of variables possible. But you have one thing that is inherent in networks, which is IP addressing, right? For example, just one very example. And if you want to make IP addressing as a constant rather than a variable, then you will need to solve that problem, right? Because if you now are building networks everywhere in the public cloud, in your branch offices, in your private data centers, but that variable does not change because you want the click and deploy, because the faster you deploy, the quicker time to market you have, of course.
Right.
That's very clear for everyone. But now you have all these other problems to resolve, right? Now I'm clicking and deploy, but now everything has the same network, right? So how am I going to connect those things together?
So it's
well, you sound like you're going to strangle us with Nat there, and don't do that to me. I don't. Anyway, so I actually have to jump in on this, Mark, because way back at the beginning, when Nuno says, well, always something that always intrigues me, and this is this idea that somehow everybody's going to be using the internet as WAN one day, and that'll be the WAN, right? And that's great. I think people love the internet because the consumption model is so simple, right? I mean, it's DHCP based. It's perfect. You just kind of drop a link in. There's not too much configuration. We love that part of it, right? But the fact is that internet is built mostly on the backs of service provider core private networks. And if it truly was that all businesses go towards internet, two things are going to happen. Either we're not going to build that anymore because there's no incentive to do so, to build a commodity service on top of private infrastructure. So that means that who's going to invest in the future in robust, good quality internet service? Usually it's paid for by private network revenues, right? So I wonder economically with those two forces how they're going to balance each other, right? I don't see we can go all the way to internet, because I don't see there's enough incentive to maintain that network anymore, right? Then it becomes like a commodity, like electricity, which should be, then it becomes regulated. It could be, something like that in order to get investment. I still think there's going to be a healthy balance of private and public connectivity, or private and internet connectivity out there. It's just economically unviable the other way.
Is there a component of that me, I'm always looking for what makes it even more complex, and I can't help that wonder how edge, and compute workloads at the edge make this even even a richer, if that's the right way of saying it, a more complicated discussion, right?
Mhm.
How does that change things?
It's funny, that point, because that point, if you think a little bit about what caused that, right? Because some time ago, like a few years ago, several years ago, there was a lot of workloads living at the edge, right? And now obviously we call it edge. By then we didn't call it edge, but we had workloads in, we had servers in in branch offices. You have all these things, and the reason was there was not enough connectivity to have those services elsewhere. There was constraints about bandwidth. The network was not there. And when the network did that exponential leap into having more bandwidth available everywhere, then people start centralizing the workloads, centralizing the services, because now it was okay to have just a bigger pipe and send all the traffic back to the private location where things were going to be, like the servers and the applications they were leaving, right? So what caused now the change from moving the applications back to edge locations? It's that more and more and more information is being generated at those edge locations,
That's
and more
right.
and more information needs to be processed at those edge locations. So it's not so much about, oh, the network is not there. The network is there. The network exists. But tied to network, there is also latency. There is bigger paths, lower paths. And let's talk back about the internet. Obviously, you cannot have the SLA. And therefore, you tend to now have bunches of applications or services that are consuming or generating data closer to where they need to be, closer to the users, or closer to other applications that also need to be processed remotely and they are latency sensitive and all that.
One thing
Yeah.
to think about too here is like with, what are the big companies doing? So for the companies that have tried to go to public cloud and they're using a lot of like PaaS services and they have public endpoints. Okay, they're hitting those public endpoints. Like I'll use an example, like with Microsoft Azure, you have service endpoints. This came out, and what happened was there was a big challenge with security teams, security practitioners with, okay, this service endpoint, it's talking to this, and this. We really don't have control over it. And okay, now there's another PaaS service. It works slightly different. And now there's another one. It works slightly different. And we can't tell these dev teams no. So there was a lot of pushback from the enterprise space to say, hey, we want to be able to access these services via our private RFC 1918 space from the VNet. So then Microsoft releases Private Link to bring it down to that level. So it's like almost, hey, we want the benefits of these public cloud services, but we want to kind of do it in the old way. And they're seeing gigantic adoption of doing it that way with Private Link. Private Link is immensely popular. So how can enterprises, like, what is their ability to adopt like internet only lifestyle like that?
I think that is for now, William. To be honest, I think that happens now until people realize that there are ways to secure their applications to be publicly available, and there are. People are just not aware, and normally we live in a very network centric infrastructure kind of view, and people, the network people know that if they keep the links private and if they keep their their IP addressing private, then they will not be needing to expose or to build other services to actually protect those workloads. And I think that's a fallacy, because if you think about it, every time that you are connecting to workloads, you need to secure them straight away. You should, at least you should. You should need to secure them straight away. But having that mindset of, oh, I'm going to keep my my network private. I'm going to keep all private IP addressing scheme, and I'm secure. Well, not really, because a lot of attacks come from the inside, right? So I think that principle that people have, I'm not going to expose my services to the internet, and therefore I'm safe. I don't think that is very true anymore. And
William,
also,
I love the lifestyle analogy. It makes me think of, hey, internet, that's for you young kids. I mean, when you grow up, you use the real network, right?
That's
what it feels like, though, because I was it wasn't too long ago that I was in the midst of those conversations trying to usher in the new, I would say, era of things. And there's a lot of things that do not die very easy. They're so embedded in culture that I don't know what it would take to flip them over.
Yes.
You're not getting rid of me that fast, William. Nice try, pal. But it does beg
the other point as well is how people access that data, right? Because if it's private, as you mentioned, William, if it's private and people want to keep it private, if it's using the the express routes of Azure or the direct connects of AWS, okay, it's all private. And how can a guy that now works at home or works or needs to do some work, I don't know, in at the beach, maybe, I don't know, somewhere else that doesn't have a private connectivity? Are we going back to VPNs and tromboning all the traffic to those? You know what I mean? That there's the access to those applications also needs to be considered, and also about the way that those applications are consuming other services, right? Those applications now, they are evolving as well, and they want to consume maybe a SaaS service, right? Think about it, right? A private application, a very private application, now needs to consume something that the organization decided that, we are going to consume this part of data from a SaaS provider. So now that application at least needs to have access to that SaaS provider and needs to go over the internet, right?
Yeah,
that's a great point. And I'd like to make the point and see if it sticks. Is that some of these are not cloud-based, right? So it's some of it's cloud-based and some of it's back home on your private network, right? It's all of it, and you've got to be constructed to operate with both. So it does beg the question: you got to secure these things in new and exciting ways, right? So how do we approach that? How do we do these things in new and exciting ways? What's the right approach?
I think that the way that security also has been kind of evolving is very different than what we used to know about security, right? Security for us several years ago was about a big firewall, like a perimeter firewall, to defend the door of my house, right? And that has changed quite a lot, because security is not only a big firewall, and to be honest, maybe the firewall is one of the easiest things to bypass nowadays, security wise, right? So there are lots of other components that need to be part of that equation, and it really depends on what services and how are people exposing those services. Are they exposing it to the internet? Are they exposing to only private users? But those services need to be secured, and everyone talks a lot about zero trust. Okay, that's one framework that is very important indeed, and then is very interesting. But there are also the first impression that people need to have is, how am I, or who do I need to expose this service to, and do I need to make it available over the internet? Do I need to make it available privately? And therefore then take the direction of what services do I need to use to protect that application.
All right. So is that, are there paradigm changes here? I don't hear anything that's should be too difficult to overcome, but is it really that easy, Steve?
I think there are some big changes, obviously. I think what Nuno's trying to get at, of course, is where security occurs, right? And the ultimate destination is it's going to occur at the client and the server, right? And everything in between is a transaction that's either allowed or disallowed based on the policy, right? But there's other things going on as well. What we see in cloud security today is, in the way I look at it, is like two solitudes, right? There's like a hub and spoke view of the world, in the sense that you've got this firewall in the sky, everything goes to it, and then off the back end, I have to peer into all my different places that I would go: SaaS, cloud, private data center, whatever it is. And that hub is, got to have a lot of processing capability. We're only at the very, early stages of adoption of this kind of integrated, architecture. And if it's going to dominate the industry, it's going to have to be able to support, petabytes of traffic, right? And then you can, of course, distribute that. And then there's another way of looking at the problem. Another way of looking at the problem is that this is, my service is kind of around the edge of, around the edge of my network, right? And I'm primarily solving an internetworking problem, and I want to go through and have security services at different points in that network. So that's more of like a service insertion model. I come to a place, if I need to do security, I do it, and then I go to my final destination. But the beauty of that architecture is I have the internetworking already built in. If it's an SD-WAN service or another kind of routing service, those edge network cloud points have the ability to, build in those cloud peerings and other SaaS peerings, and it's primarily an internetworking problem. So it's kind of just, how you view the problem. Do you view it as like the firewall in the sky, or do you view it as primarily I'm building a network here. I have to go site to site. I have to go site to cloud. I have to go site to SaaS. There are many places I need to go, and different traffic needs for each one of those. But I think that's kind of how I view it. But the way the network is built underneath it has changed as well, and I think that's what's driving a lot of these, these new decisions that we have to make, right? So if you look before, in the SD-WAN days, right, the early SD-WAN days, we had branches and we had data centers, right, for the most part, and they were at the far edges of the network, and people built the WAN in between, right? The WAN was a true internetwork. I could go anywhere I wanted, right? And there was really nothing inside that WAN that I cared about, right? I just make sure that I, using internet or service provider to get my packets as quickly as possible where they need to go. But what's happened with cloud and SaaS is that the cloud providers have been pushing their IP edge out into the network, into these co-location facilities, right? And we've been talking about that the last year or so in our working group, right? And then the same thing with the SaaS providers. They're pushing their IP edge closer to you as a customer, closer to your metros, in cloud, in co-location facilities. And what that means is, generally speaking, if I jump on the internet, I'm probably only going one hop, and then I'm being pulled off and being groomed either onto a SaaS provider network or a cloud provider network, or even, what we call programmable service providers now, like, these new SDCI providers, where I can basically go onto a private network that effectively allows me to connect directly to the cloud through bespoke infrastructure, right, at high speed, high capacity. So this IP edge has really been pushed out. The IP edge was very far from the branches in the past, and now it's moving, very close to them. So that allows a, distribution, to distribute your access, to these places in these colos. But it also creates a problem. It means that when I get to the colo, I have to decide what to do with that traffic. And I want control over that, because I don't want to have just, IPsec tunnel to every cloud service and every SaaS service or whatever, or, TLS session or whatever that I want. I need to have some control over that. Maybe, for example, like I was talking about earlier, I want to do some security scanning or something like that. But generally speaking, this colo now becomes a place in the network where we can control peering, and we can control, what connections we allow people to use. And basically, I can bring my branch traffic in there and have a level of control. So the network now has kind of three main control points. It has the branch, the client, right? It has this co-location facility service where you might have, a network as a service or a network cloud type service. And then you have, of course, your cloud and SaaS and your private data center endpoints. So that's kind of, the WAN is kind of breaking up in that way.
One thing to think about too is culture and just kind of how applications have been built over time, because in some of these large, CIO comes into room and says, hey, we're doing digital transformation. We have 2,000 applications across all these data centers. I want, 70% of them to be in cloud in the next 2 years. And then going in and actually trying to peel apart, even the data. Okay, like what is the data explicitly used by this application only? Can we peel that apart? And then what ends up happening is it's not that easy, because that data is used by all these other services in the data center. So they don't want to have it sitting in two places. So they'll put in the front end in the cloud, and they'll do like a tiered hybrid architecture. So then that's talking back to the data center. And then instead of, trying to fix the data issue, they just go into the next application and the next application. And then all these applications are architected a little bit different. And then you have this proliferation of how many different, variety kills at this point. There's too much variety in the cloud providers. And if you don't have any standard to say, hey, from a security perspective, this is our posture. This is how we're going to do it with these services. These are what we're allowing. And before we bring in a new service for you to use in this cloud provider, we want to go through and do an analysis, testing, and we want to certify it and say that, hey, it's got to be used in this way only. And, so a lot of this has to come back to on the enterprise culture and trying to tackle things more tactically.
All right, I told everybody at the beginning of this podcast that William was the nicest one. It was going to be the nicest one on the show. And CEO was right. He cares about culture, and that's important.
There you go.
I love it. Now we're coming to the part of the program where I ask a question that we didn't prep for at all because William just brought up an interesting point of view. And that is, with this kind of change, like, are we now confronting issues like in the old days? I might be thinking about capacity, how I'm monitoring. Is there a culture of change that needs to be happening differently when I go multi-cloud or cloud multi-cloud that includes how we approach consumption? Is that something you're seeing, William? Is it just not a problem anymore?
Well, one thing is user experience has changed drastically. So you don't just have the user experience of like the customers of some company. You have user experience internally. Like if you don't make your development tools, like the way that developers can interact with cloud and the rest of IT services, if that's not a good experience, they're going somewhere else where it is a good experience. So you have user experience on like multiple different levels. And I think that's huge now because work is very portable now. Someone can jump in the blink of an eye, and then you've lost good talent
or moved. I mean, there's more to F5 than just a layer 7 pretty face, right? I mean, we're gonna put you where you belong. I mean, I know Nuno, your roots are Volterra, but I mean, you're an F5 guy. That there's a company that's spent a lot of time with traffic management and placement and all that kind of stuff. What's your take on this? Is it transformation breed a whole new view of consumption, infrastructure consumption, and where we're putting our workloads?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of work have been done in the past, not only by my company, but many companies around, about managing the traffic, right? But managing the traffic now, what it needs to evolve to is to manage the traffic across different environments. I say it, and I sound maybe that is very simplistic. It's not, because there is some work that needs to be done, obviously, on the background. But the reality is that this proliferation of applications and everything that William just mentioned, that you can install them anywhere. And I will actually add one more thing. It's because that talent that William was talking about is the guy that is going to decide where his application is going to be built, right? If he's more comfortable with GCP, then it is GCP. And if it is Azure, and it at the point, if the talent is very big, at the point, doesn't really matter if the company or the organization has a big agreement with Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS. If the person decides that and presents a good use case, and there are several good use cases, especially around what the different public clouds offer of best of breed, right? Because there are differences there. So one person might be coding or might be developing some application that will benefit and actually be cheaper to deploy on another public cloud other than the one that the organization is using right now. And if that person presents a good enough reason on how to do it there, then it should be very little friction to allow that person to do it. But now the infrastructure guys need to sort it out in terms of, let's go and reach out to that new one. And they can do it in two ways. They can either do it the way that they have been doing it before, how they connect to the new to the existing public cloud providers right now. They do the same thing to the other one. And there might be a couple of problems here. The first one is that public cloud provider might not provide or might offer the same things that the other public cloud providers offer. That's one. And the second one is that the other public cloud provider might actually have better ways of doing it, let's call it different ways of doing, because there is no pretty baby or ugly baby, right? It's a different way of doing it, and that different way might be more aligned to those architects that visualize their reach and their application in that way. So it's about where the workloads are going to be, where can we make them available. So discover the applications in one side, exposing the applications across, and this should be completely seamless. I mean, I know that Steve is going to be really pissed off at me saying that the network. I'm not saying.
Somebody's got to build the damn network.
Steve,
I'm not saying that the network.
Steve's not pissed off about that. He just can't believe that you said there's no such thing as an ugly baby. But
right, and I'm going to say, I think that's not such. I don't think that the network should become a commodity, but it should act like the old phones that you pick up, like your analog phone, and you had a dial tone. That's it. That's what the network should be. And then and it should always be there. But there are lots of processes, and you mentioned a few, Mark. You mentioned visibility, which I translate to observability, right? So now that we have all these different environments, and if I have these different environments that I don't own, because I don't own AWS, I don't own Azure, I don't own GCP, what is the visibility that those public cloud providers are giving me? Are they all the same? Not really.
Oh no.
But Nuno, don't you ever notice that when you pick up the phone and you dial England, you get a different ringtone than you get in North America?
Oh,
I want that ringtone, you see? And so the thing is, right? And when I say ringtone, I mean the ring that you hear on your phone, of course.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, right? So this goes to the cultural thing that William was talking about. There has to be some cultural shift here if we want back in the day when we were talking about network automation and abstraction, and it was all about, customers don't want to deal with all the configuration, right? The analogy was always, hey, you're building a network, we're giving you the parts of a car. You build whatever car you want, right? We give you all the parts, right? You can tune it to whatever you want, right? Hot rod or whatever. Then that's not what people want, right? They want, nobody wants that. They just want to drive a car. And I say, yeah, but my car has 3 inputs: a steering wheel, a gas pedal, and a brake, right? That's easy to abstract, but the hard part is to abstract the control that people still want in the network. So that's the tough thing to think about when we're talking about the culture, right? So to your point, I often talk to customers and service providers, and like when we're trying to build this network cloud, we're talking about API programmable control, and I want to abstract the underlay, for example. I don't care what your underlay is built, just expose services to me and I will pick the service that I want, right? Then the question I often get back, well, what about, how am I going to get visibility to the VLAN you're on, and what router is having a problem? And it's like, you can't have all that, and keep it simple too, right? Even because there's only so far you can go in terms of drill downs, and you see this often. Like we have, ThousandEyes as part of Cisco, right? You get awesome visibility with ThousandEyes dashboard of internet hops. So if there's something wrong, there's something wrong. What the hell am I going to do about that? It's not my machine, not my router, right? It's somebody else, some other service provider somewhere along the hops. It might not even be my original ISP. All I can do at that point is change the way I build my network. But that's not the answer you want, right? The answer you want is to build the network so that you have the right level of controls. So yes, there might be something that's going on, but if there's a problem in this service access point, I'm going to hop to another service access point immediately so that I can bypass what's going on there. And then I got to let the service provider figure it out, right? So yeah.
Boy, exactly. I did lose a dial tone, and I'm glad I'm back. And but these are important things. I love the different dial tones, and all my brain went to was there's. In American English, there's cookies. In British English, there's a biscuit. And I'm just telling you, if you give me a biscuit, I want gravy on it. Like that's how my brain works. And so all right. Any parting?
We were just finishing off by saying that if you want true abstraction, you really want to work at delivering new business models very quickly. You have to kind of let go of some of the control you had in the past, and that's a cultural shift that people are still working through.
I agree.
All right. Any parting shots, William? Any parting shots on network transformation?
Maybe just to add on Steve's point there, like abstractions are great, and why they can't solve every problem, they can solve a lot of problems, and even reducing the amount of physical hardware that you have to manage. That lends itself to more effective automation potentially. And then, reducing the amount of engineering required to make packets flow from point A to point B. Hey, this is also a good thing for, design as a whole and, standardizing things. But at the same time, like, every company is going to want to insert themselves into a different point of where that abstraction begins at and gets heavier at. So it is not that easy it's a rabbit hole, really.
I got it. Nuno, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would pick up on a few things about the automation, because we are talking about automation, or just mentioned a little bit about automation. It's automation. I totally agree. Reduce the number of devices. Maybe not the number of devices, or actually the number of devices might increase, but the number of things that you are managing needs to decrease. That's for sure. Because ultimately, what you want is to streamline your operations. We have to think about it, right? It's not private environments anymore. It's not only about the branch office, the private data center. It's about all the public clouds. It's about SaaS providers. It's about all these things that you guys now need to interact. So it's about streamlining the operations. Don't go into those rabbit holes that William was talking about. Don't go into them thinking that you will solve it with all these technologies that are available. They are available, but to operate all of them, it's going to be a nightmare. And you are increasing your team, and every time that you add increasing operational burden, you are increasing your time to market as well, and time to market is key.
Steve, I'll give you the last word, buddy.
Yeah, sounds good. So I think, I'm going to end off with consumption model, because I think that's the real transformation that we're trying to affect here with the network cloud, right? So I go to a quote that I read from Andy Jassy. It was a number of years ago, and I think it really illustrates this. So the beauty of infrastructure as a service, what you want to be able to do to innovate in your business is you want to be able to create a lot of experiments. You want to run a lot of experiments. You want to try things, but you don't want to be saddled with the collateral effect damage, so to speak, of those experiments, in the sense that like I said earlier, I bought a whole bunch of gear so I could run this experiment. I don't want that. I don't want that collateral damage of my failed experiments. I don't need that or want that. I want to be able to innovate. I need to be able to fail fast. Infrastructure as a service allows you to do that, right? That's what the cloud brought. We want to bring the same thing here in the network cloud to network. That's essentially what it is.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, listen, technical debt, it's not just for developers, right? It's an infrastructure thing too.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's how I see it. So listen, everybody is getting a sense of what this team is about. The network cloud team working group at ONUG is such a great group. I'd invite all of you listening to check out what we're all about, and start by checking out the document that we put out, and the document that we've been talking about, building the new network cloud, a playbook for the journey to agile network infrastructure. Everyone you're seeing here helped contribute to that. Nuno and Steve and William alike all have their hand in putting that piece of collateral out. Everything we do at ONUG is about creating collateral that help our membership. So, take a look at that. You can get to it at onug.net. The other thing you can get to at onug.net is to our sign up page. If you are interested in joining us at the ONUG Spring 2022 at the Meadowlands, it's at the Meadowlands Expo Center in New Jersey. It's April 27th and 28th. It's going to be a great show. I didn't mention at the beginning that we're actually having a conference inside of a conference. We're going to be doing a DevOps conference running concurrently, and that's going to be great.
And this whole panel is going to be there.
It's going to be fantastic. So go to onug.net and get registered for that. And also, we sort of brushed up against the automation piece. And so I'll just tell you that at the ONUG conference, this team, the Network Cloud Working Group, is going to be giving a primer about the next in the series of the Network Cloud podcast series, and be talking about API and automation, right, Steve?
Yep, that's the next thing on the dock for this working group. So
it's going to be great. So I just would invite everybody to take a look at the Building the New Network Cloud, a playbook for the journey to agile network infrastructure. Steve, Nuno, and William, thanks for joining me today on the ONUG podcast, and we will see everybody on the next ONUG podcast. Thanks, everybody.
See you, everybody.
Thanks. Awesome. See you guys.